Hello, and welcome to the Dissonance Podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. This week, Matt and Elizabeth were inspired by an op-ed that warned against describing those with whom we disagree as evil because it increases vitriol when we most need vision. Elizabeth admits to feeling squeezed between demons on both ideological extremes, and Matt offers some assurances that we can turn to our own core values and principles for respite and strength. This episode is a little bit of talk therapy for the politically exhausted. Please consider donating to the Institute for Liberal Values, a 501c3 nonprofit organization at ilvalues.org. All donations go to support our continued programming to realize our mission to provide the skills and support required to build community where there has been division, to encourage free expression where there has been censorship, and to foster optimism where there is fear. Hi, welcome back to the Dissonance Podcast with Matt Watson and Elizabeth. On this fine day, at least, I had sent Matt an article that it's an editorial, which we can link in the podcast notes, entitled "Dealing with the Devil," and it's by David Scharfenberg. I think that's probably how you pronounce his name. Because we had been talking about Jonathan Rauch's book and cross purposes, and this has a little bit of that. Maybe I was more open to its message because we'd been having that conversation about how about the purpose of thick religion in American society. I don't know. I mean, I really wanted somebody to talk to about this article, and so I thought of you right away. And so I'm glad that
Hey.
you are willing to talk to me about it. For me, the gist of it is that demonizing someone
Yeah.
or a group of people is not a useful way to move forward in society. That's sort of the broader, message. And I read this and I saw what I felt people were doing to me when during the election season as a left-leaning person, as Biden's destroying the country, like
Mm.
like the Incredible Hulk, just like destroying the country. And now I see myself maybe not saying that out loud to people, but saying that in my head, like, oh my God, can our country survive another Trump administration? And this, sort of, and I'm doing my own, sort of demonization. And I don't like that very much. I mean, again, I'm always fascinated by my own hypocrisies, and here's another one where I recognized it. So, anyway, and I also, if possible, maybe you can offer some perspective from this, from a maybe a religion standpoint. What does it
Sure.
mean to demonize something, someone, something, a group? How do we maybe work through that from that
You bet.
perspective?
Yeah. Well, that's thank you for the compliment, Elizabeth. It's very kind of you to invite me in and to have this discussion. I also found the article quite interesting, and this does not just play over for me for my spiritual practices, but it also plays over into the pro social work movement and the efforts that we're engaging in as pro social workers. Because that is the first principle of pro social work, is to humanize
Mm.
differences. rather than to demonize, or in a softer way of describing that, to otherize someone, to describe them as an other, but to see our common humanity. And so as I read this, that was the first thing that came to mind. And of course, pro social workers is a little bit of an integration of professional practice, but also to some degree some spiritual practice. These are some things, these are principles that are not necessarily scientific or empirically based. They are principles that to some degree are tenets of faith. And as you and I discussed through the review of Cross Purposes, Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy, and how the erosion of Christian principles, thick Christianity, and specifically has impacted our civil discourse and democracy in the United States. That is, I think it's really important that people understand what it is that you believe and stand for, and what you value specifically. And through our association with the Institute for Liberal Values, it is a values-based organization. It's pluralistic. There are a multitude of ways that you can apply those values, but ultimately, you and I connect because we value freedom, we value reason, we value science, we value, and these things are not all supremely valued, but they're placed in a context where we have some shared values. We value pluralism, and the erosion of pluralism is what we're seeing through this demonization. And interestingly, as you were seeing some of that yourself, I'm looking at that and saying, yeah, I see where he's coming from to some degree. I don't agree with all of it, because I think that there's a missing, there are missing parts to it. I mean, there's only so much space in a newspaper, but I also recognize that while there's a lot of folks who are demonizing Donald Trump, I also saw Donald Trump in the election demonizing Democrats. And, we have these labels that are being hurled back and forth, and that is to our own peril, to everyone's own peril, when you start to demonize rather than dehumanize. So,
because then we have to deal with the devil, right?
yeah,
And it's a lot, that's a whole nother hurdle to get over. This is something that somebody can point finger. It's like, oh, well, you're dealing with the devil now. And
right.
so, you're part of, you've compromised yourself, whatever. How so, I mean, the article starts out, they're talking about, separating, parents from children, cutting off, TB, tuberculosis, and, other kinds of the 5 cent deworming, medication, worldwide through USAID and those kinds of things. Uh, but also then here in the United States, talking about, you know, uh, somebody who maybe campaigned on lowering prices, then doing things that seem to be, uh, somebody who, counter to that, somebody who campaigned on jobs, then laying off massive people. How can how does more thick religious viewpoint of that help someone cope with this temptation to demonize? Like, is there something, do you think this is just this is an individual battle that we all have within ourselves all the time, or do you
Yes.
think that thick religion helps us to navigate this tendency to point fingers and to, because there is a comfort, again, there's a comfort in this feeling that you have a clear enemy, right? It's like, even if you can't fight against that enemy, even if you feel hopeless, it feels, it's a sort of this comfortable heuristic. I know what that is. It's bad.
It's evil.
and it's evil. Um and so I just put that in the basket of evil every time something happens. And what the article is talking about is sort of the walling off then. Oh, that's the evil room, right? That's,
Mhm.
don't open that door because there's evil inside of that door. Um how can I mean, do you find in your own social work and religious practice tools for coping with this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, what I see is the tendency. If you look at Donald Trump and you see some of the things that he's implementing, it's very easy to see in the media and other things ways to demonize what he's doing if you want to. But if you want to find some measure of peace within yourself as well as in within the culture, it's important to look at the principles and what is it that where is it that he's coming from, and what is it that he's trying to achieve, and what is it that he's up to. Is it just that he's evil and he's just some horrible human being that's trying to take over the world and isolate the United States from social responsibilities to,
Yes.
okay, yeah, so
There's
that,
a part of me that's going, yes.
yeah, so there's the natural tendency to do that. But as you look at the first Trump administration and you look at some of the things that he actually did or actually did accomplish, and look at what were his guiding principles, as much as he spouts off and just says a lot of foolish things, look at what some of the things were that he did. There were no, and you look at these principles of conservatism. And what does that mean? And you don't have to believe some of these things, but they are principles that if you understand them, then I think you're less likely to demonize, and you're less likely to stir up some of the problems and the troubles that come through demonization. So what is it that he's trying to do? Well, the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has identified some basic principles that I'll just put into my own words. I don't know these are his, but um, principles of freedom. That's important. Principles of human dignity, that we try to mitigate and minimize our involvement in foreign wars. Um, that we prioritize free enterprise. Now, I have some good friends, one who's a PhD in economics, and he loves to a great degree what Donald Trump is doing, but he hates the tariff thing. He hates what he's doing with tariffs. Um, limited government, limited government and government and regulation. That eliminating some of the regulations that open up and enable free trade, free markets, those kinds of things. That's a priority. But also the rule of law, and that this whole thing about immigration is involving the rule of law, implementing the rule of law, uh, you know, encouraging legal immigration instead of opening the borders. I think that is something that appealed to a lot of citizens, but also peace through strength. That um, peace through strength seemed to work when Ronald Reagan was elected into office, and it seems to have had some impact on from a conservative person's perspective, on the Hamas Israel war. Um,
So if
so principles, I think, just knowing where he's coming from and trying to empathize with those principles. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to believe in them.
well,
But there are some principles there.
yeah, so I could, like probably get behind many of those, principles to some extent. N- I can't. I I mean, I'm not like some political whiz kid, but I find it difficult to see a connection between those principles and many of the actions. And I guess I'm feeling unsympathetic towards um, those, those principles. Um, I'm not really seeing it. I'm seeing, again, like a lot of hypocrisy, saying, America first, kind of like, oh, or rule of law, and then essentially like thwarting the Constitution over and over again. Just saying, well, Congress be damned. I don't really care, I'm supposed to, or, by law, I'm supposed to go through Congress to do certain things because I said it. It is now, I mean, what was the latest thing? Like, what if it's done to keep America safe, it can't be illegal. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, so you're saying that, I don't think that to use a sort of interpersonal example, we can believe in the same basic principles, but for me, killing someone is the way to get it.
Mm,
And for you, it's some other way to get it, right? And so I don't think that negates that killing is immoral and illegal simply because I did it for my basic principles.
mm,
Okay. And so that's kind of how where, where I'm feeling the disconnect, and I'm feeling um the the angst, the constant sort of looming dread, um, because it doesn't feel like the behaviors match those values.
mhm.
And so you can, and I mean, I guess it's sort of like, I mean, if we use like maybe how people in the Catholic Church felt when, massive, inappropriate behavior was revealed, historical,
Yeah.
maybe orphanages, where kids were abused by people who espoused religion and great values. And that's kind of how I feel. I feel like even if I agree with your values, the methods are so extreme,
Mhm.
so you're trying to beat it out of me, kind of thing. And again, I saw this on the left, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I am a, shall we say a victim, or a, whatever, of the left, who were doing the same thing, right? Trying to beat my sort of, what they would call my right wingness out of me, right? Which was just not left enough for them.
Mhm.
Or my ideas about sort of viewpoint diversity, oh, only certain viewpoints, and the we have very similar values,
Yeah.
but the way that they went about ensuring that those values were getting more widespread was, in my opinion, immoral, not true to the very values to which they claim to espouse. And I don't know how to come together about that. So it isn't just about, if we just leave the politics aside,
Mhm.
whether it's right or left, and how does one manage this constant, like, don't be afraid. I mean, that was in the book, right? Don't be afraid. That's not good enough. Like, just don't feel a certain way.
Mm,
Oh, I can't
mhm.
not feel a certain way. You just turn it off.
Sure.
That's
Well, I
not
think
how
you
it
were saying
works.
don't act afraid. Lean in rather than turn away.
Mm,
Don't avoid, but
mm,
lean into the person that you're feeling fearful of, and dialogue with them. Have a discussion, humanize them, hear them out as to what they're saying, where they're coming from. And as you do that, then you can likely find something that you agree on. But I think acting afraid
mm,
is eroding the civil discourse in our country. Um, or acting afraid, when you're afraid, you're more likely to get angry and to lob bombs, verbal
Or
bonds.
just
Yeah,
fade into the woodwork and not even participate
exactly.
at all. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you aggress in response to your fear, or you turn away in response to your fear. Either way, if you lean into the fear and just acknowledge that, yeah, this is pretty scary. This doesn't make sense to me. This is very confusing to me. Can you help me understand? Can we talk this through a little bit and acknowledge that there are some inconsistencies? There is some hypocrisy. There are some things that don't make sense, but sometimes they make sense from a different paradigm.
Mm.
And that's what I think is what Jonathan Rauch was doing in his book, is he was saying, if you dismiss religion as, because a lot of religion is thin religion, or if you dismiss it because it's, a sharp, politicized, aggressive religion, you may throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there's something to being able to identify and articulate your beliefs and your principles.
And I from I'll just interject some psychology here. So
Right.
from a perspective of personality psychology, I've never I like personality psych. I teach personality psych sometimes, but the idea that there's a bad personality is, I think, also a form of demonizing. My students often like to imagine that there's a personality associated with crime, for example. So we'll just give people a personality test, and then we'll know who's going to commit a crime.
Mm.
And or we'll give them a brain scan, and so we'll look at their brain, and it will just know, right, that there's something wrong with certain groups, or certain individuals or certain groups of individuals, that is predictive of future behavior. And I felt a little bit about, in that way, the sort of demonization of a personality, because there isn't something predictive about personality and certain kinds of behavior. Even
Mhm.
people who have extreme mental illness, or people who score high in psychopathy, um or low in empathy or something like that, with socialization, with a proper, I say proper, with the right combination, sort of the perfect storm of socialization,
Mhm.
those
Environment.
people live perfectly wonderful lives. They make good, employees, bosses, spouses, parents, whatever. Uh, Although, certainly there are certain circumstances where, the world presents, a situation where the worst of us, whatever our personality combination uniqueness is, the world presents unique situations where the worst of us appears, just like the best of us. And
Mhm.
so I've never bought into this idea of, like, sort of categorizing someone or a group as, a bad personality. And yet, again, I definitely would, felt, when I read this, a little like that creeping, like, oh shoot,
Mhm.
this is something that I'm doing and that I've done. And this, they point out, the author points out, how we will do this to our own detriment, because sort of, just like in retaliation, if you will, for the extreme left, who's what's like 12% of 12% on the extreme right and 12% on the extreme left, is
Mhm.
basically, they're more alike than different, and they're duking it out. And we
Mhm.
have this pendulum swing, this back and forth. And um if we do what the right did, and demonize, are we just in for the same treatment?
Mhm.
um
Are we just pendulating back and forth?
yeah, yeah. And uh although I think he thinks that that's less dangerous than, again, sort of walling off, and I don't know. I mean, when I get this, he says, block mega culture out of mind,
Mm.
dismiss it as evil incarnate, and suppress any doubts about their own faith that it has stirred. So if we do that, I think he's saying that it's even worse than maybe having this kind of conversation where we try to work through how to stop demonizing another person or party or something. So how? So I think we've established that I just can't sort of say, "Oh, it's the principles that does it for me." Okay, it's
Well,
like, "Oh, they're
but
doing it."
Elizabeth, what you're experiencing, I mean, your experience right now is you read this article and you identified something that created some dissonance with some incongruence. So, yes, there's a part of you that that does not like Donald Trump, does not like what he's doing, but there's another part of you that says, but dismissing it and putting it in a box and not examining it is also not being true to something within you. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So, what is that part of you? What is that value or that belief within you that feels incongruent?
Yeah, I guess I don't like myself
When?
when I, you know, put a whole group of people or person or whatever in, in a walled off kind of when
Why
I,
not? What's important? What
yeah,
matters to
because
you?
of my values, because I would like to think of myself as a person who values viewpoint diversity, who believes that even the Donald Trumps of the world, as much as I am, it's difficult for me to see that there is that person has something to contribute to the conversation. Now, would I rather that that person wasn't president? Yes.
Mhm.
Um, so that there maybe were other ways that I wish, that maybe someone who is a little more respectful of, the Constitution and a little more felt a little more reverence for the United States as a little more. What I don't see his form of what he calls reverence as sort of it would be like me going to church for the just because you asked me to
Right.
and I would um but then just sort of like in the middle of the service going
Yeah.
what about, well,
It
what a
seems
load of crap, what
insincere.
a load, like
Yeah.
that would be
Yeah.
completely inappropriate, right? So
Right.
I should show, while I'm in your house, I should show some appreciation for the house that I'm in, and I feel that while he and his cohort or whatever may have some contributions to make, I wish that it weren't with quite such dis- destructive, let's not just shoot up the place kind
Yeah.
of thing. um
Exactly.
uh, I was thinking when you were talking, so I don't know if you've ever seen is it Endgame, the one where Thanos snaps his fingers and wipes
Yes.
it. Okay, so the Avengers Endgame, I think, is what it is.
Okay.
So one of the bad guys, he's a bit of an anti-hero. So you kind of get his point, which is that half of the worlds, all the worlds, so half of humanity, but half of the whole universe, with the snap of a finger, just random, is wiped out.
Hmm.
And he's, again, they're fighting against him, and this is horrible and everything. But one can see how there's a reset button there,
Hmm.
right? And that we are overpopulating, we are over polluting, we are blah blah blah. And I don't want to decide who stays and who goes. And so Thanos can snap his finger and half of the universe is just wiped out with, randomly. And I see, that's, I, I was thinking when I read this, I'm like, well, can I see this as an anti-hero kind of
Hmm.
situation where, as you were saying, like, that there's ugliness and pettiness and an arbitrariness
Hmm.
to this. Um, and therefore, kind of see the anti-hero version of it.
Yeah.
Maybe a little, maybe I can see that, sort of like what you were talking about. But the other thing that I see is the possibility or the probability, the likelihood that so much good will be wiped
Hmm.
out,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
that we can't, like the Avengers, reverse time, right? And go back and try to what will be left to resurrect is half of what will be wiped out will be good if we do this sort of randomly. Half of what will be wiped out will be bad. But think about the reverse. Half of what's left will be bad,
Hmm.
right? And so are we doing this in sort of a thoughtful kind of way? What part of immigration will be left that will be good?
Hmm.
I don't know. And how much, so in this era of, so we're like, oh, we want to save money. So let's spend, what was it like? I don't even know, $8 million or something to take a couple of planes
Yeah.
to
Yep.
with like 20 people on them
Right.
each, like how is that exactly, is that
Yeah.
cutting
It's
wasteful
symbolic.
spending?
Yep.
Right. And so yeah, is this sort of like this snap of the
Yeah.
fingers
Well, that's
thing?
where you have competing interests, right? On one hand, you're trying to reduce the size of government. On the other hand, you're increasing, ICE and those kinds of things. So you've got some competing principles there. And how do you dialogue those through? How do you figure
Yeah.
those things out? Well, that's what we all live with. That's what we do day to day. We only have so much time in the day, and we have a bazillion different things that we're interested in that we would like to do. We have a lot of, you have some parts of you that really like and appreciate diversity and viewpoint diversity, and pushing back against what we've described as concentrated coercive power. um, and you see that happening, so here we are, these conservatives are talking about limited government and so forth, but then we have these this concentration of coercive power of executive orderitis, where it's happening all the time. And my response is yes, it is, and that's a problem. And it happens in both directions. And we do need to return to Congress and to the citizens of the United States, what the limits on the executive branch to simply execute these executive orders. Getting back to you, Elizabeth, is it okay if we just explore this a little bit of your internal conflict and what's happening there, and maybe recognize that when you are being true to this sense of um, viewpoint diversity, what does that look like when you are, I mean, what would it look like if you were being true to this sense of viewpoint diversity, but you also were able to express your displeasure for Donald Trump and those that support him?
I
How would?
think, yeah, I think that I can.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it matters.
Hmm.
And I felt exactly the same way about, being canceled from the left.
Okay.
There's this, this helplessness,
Mm-hmm.
this, this sort of like spinning chaos, of, where you're just sort of grabbing at things
Mm-hmm.
and nothing gives me purchase, I guess. I feel I'm on this shifting ground all the time. And now so it's like now I feel maybe more than ever, um, from both, I maybe didn't feel it as much from the right,
Mm.
for a couple of years. And then now I'm feeling more squeezed than ever.
Mm.
I can't, I don't belong anywhere. I don't, I don't fit in anywhere. And so, more and more and more, like narrower and
Yeah.
narrower and narrower.
So Elizabeth, you have these thoughts of it's not going to do any good. It's not going to matter. Um, I don't belong. I don't fit in. I've been betrayed by the left. I've been, this right stuff is making me crazy and
Well,
fearful.
and it's going to betray me. Well, I suspect it's going to betray me also,
Mm.
right? So, my suspicion is that things that
What do you worry will
so
happen? What will that betrayal look like?
well, so I've said this before, but my significant other is unemployed and unemployable because of the left, right?
Okay.
And so I am very concerned that he will lose his health care because of the right. And
Mm.
so we're trapped. So, and the left will is already crying and saying, "Oh, minorities are going to be hurt. Minority. Well, maybe this is something. I know that the extreme left doesn't like to admit this, but maybe this is something that is actually going to negatively affect people equally.
Mm.
That it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what color you are.
Well,
If you
that's
don't have health care, it's going to matter. So, and so but again, like we need to come together to think about that. I mean, there's like healthcare is, again, it's a problem that needs to be, I don't think any country in the world has solved this problem. So the idea that we're going to snap our fingers and the
yeah.
problem will be solved is not, it is, unlikely.
Yeah.
But I
So the
don't think that
simulation,
demonizing
this
each
going
other and
back and
this,
forth. Exactly.
yeah,
It's
is
just
not
gonna
going to help. Yeah.
exactly. So this pendulation going back and forth between the far right and the far left, ultimately destroys the people in the middle.
Yes.
And you have these 12% on each side that are angry enough and emotional enough that they're going to be the ones standing up, where the people in the middle, I think, need to say, well, these are my principles. And even though I don't feel like it's going to matter, even though I don't feel like I belong, if I don't feel like it, I still want to live true to pluralism, to democracy, to being a society where we do value viewpoint and political diversity, where I can agree with my adversary. I don't have to agree with my adversaries, but I can at least empathize with them and accept outcomes that I don't necessarily like. And I don't have to be angry in order to do that. I can live true to viewpoint diversity. And I can speak up, and I can have these dialogues across differences, not in an angry or a contentious tone, but in the tone that you're having right now of being able to look at it rather than being pushed around by it. Um, and this, Elizabeth, I think, is the problem with politicizing social issues. That there needs to be political and viewpoint diversity, not just in social work practice, but in all of our practices and our journalistic practices, in our academic pursuits. That when you politicize the thing, different issues, when the other side gets in, they just undo it, and they undo it sometimes even in a more extreme manner. And if you're going to govern by executive order, it's going to be undone by executive order. It
Mm.
doesn't allow for stabilization of society. And so we always, if we can just go back to what are our governing principles, and I know that might be a little bit idealistic in this chaotic world that we live in, but over time, that is the least worst solution. It
Hmm.
is the thing that gives us hope for peace. It's the thing that helps us find some common ground. What Jonathan Rauch described as, what did he say? He was quoting President Oakes, Dallin H. Oakes, on patience, negotiation, and mutual accommodation. Those are principles that we have to be looking for both within ourselves. And so being patient with yourself, you have this principle of viewpoint diversity that you just described as very important to you. But you also see some of the problems with eliminating some of the the benefits, the things that have been now afforded, to us through, government and so forth. And so trying to figure those things out and reconcile those things, I think having this kind of a dialogue gives us the best option, or maybe the least worst option.
Yeah, I just had a little epiphany while you were talking about that, and I realized, oh, I totally demonized the extreme left, and now I'm demonizing the extreme right. So it's not that I don't, maybe it's not that I don't belong or that I'm being squeezed, but I'm being surrounded by demons now, like,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm just like, they're circling, and that is partly, I guess, not in my control.
Mm-hmm.
But it is maybe partly within my control to maybe sort of, again, sort of not see them as, you know as like about to swallow me whole,
Mm-hmm.
which is sometimes how it feels.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that religion would help me in this moment. But that's why I was asking you, like, is there something that about religion that actually, helps people get through this sort of swirling demon kind
Mm-hmm.
of feeling where there's, what, just, I don't know, pain
Sure.
everywhere.
It gives peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Helps you find peace. Well, yeah, but I think, like you say, you have to legitimately believe it. You
Yeah.
can't fake it, you know?
So there's
And
nothing you can sort of just say, well, just try to nibble on it right
no, no,
here.
no. There's ways that you can help with this. Now, you have to be careful because you don't want to get in the way of you don't want to fall prey to confirmation bias for something that's not true.
Right.
But but I believe that it's critical that one belief that has a belief that truth exists. And so in a world today where there's this postmodern perspective that there is no such thing as absolute truth, that truth is a social construct, that be true to your own truth. Well, your own truth is going to be determined by your mood sometimes,
Right.
and if you can say that, no, these are my governing principles, these are the things that I believe in. Elizabeth, I know that you believe in diversity. I know that you believe in viewpoint diversity. And I know that you believe that there is different truth. You believe that religion is a tax to get you there, that it may not necessarily be required. But those are your beliefs. And so if you look at those things, no, I truly believe in that stuff, even when, I'm tempted to betray those beliefs. Um, to some degree, that is your religion. Now, I'm part of a large institutional religion, but somehow you have to find and articulate, so I've inherited a lot of stuff that I've looked at and examined, and I didn't just inherit it blindly. I mean, I've had to, through my youth and everything, I had to, make choices. Did I really believe this stuff? I mean, some of this stuff's pretty extraordinary, but what it ultimately came down to is, okay, how do I know I'm not just deceiving myself? Versus, no, do I really want to believe this? Because belief ultimately, I think, comes from agency, from a choice. What do you want to believe? There's something about what you want to believe about diversity, about truth, about values. There is something inherently valuable about having values, that once you can find and you articulate those things, whether you've inherited them from prior generations or not, or from prior traditions, or whether you have, inherited some of it that you're not aware of or conscious of, but you've ultimately inherited, explored, examined it, and chosen it. Well, then once you've chosen it, then live true to it. you're paying a price. And that's where it's kind of hard, is I think you're having to pay a price, and you've paid a price already for some different beliefs or an alternative belief, and now you're trying to figure it out. So again, acknowledge the values, articulate them, acknowledge what you believe in, examine those values. How do you do that legitimately? Well, you have to desire. It ultimately comes down to what is it you want. So that's that first thing. Dialogue and explore them, but then there's kind of some constraints of democracy, constraints of Christianity, constraints of my own faith tradition of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that I've consciously explored, consciously examined, recognized, yeah, there's some things here that I don't entirely understand, but over time, the more that I've experienced it, the more it does seem to make sense.
What do you think was special? Jonathan Rauch really highlighted, that you know Latter-day Saints was just almost a special kind of example of how we can do a better job of sort of returning to the thick Christianity. What do you think is special about your particular faith that led him to to highlight
Yeah.
it?
Well, I always try and walk a fine line here, because I don't want to come across as proselyting and so forth. But at the
But
same
I
time,
just
I'm
asked you
part
to,
of an
so
organization that does, and I support missionaries all over the
yeah.
world who are out proselyting. So if you're inviting it, I'll explain kind of my thoughts on it. And we talked a little bit about this at the end of our conversation with him. Is I think that what is unique about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to some degree, it's not exclusive, is a constitution of faith. That it's not about a particular person, but it's about a constitution. It's about specific principles that govern your life. And so the prophet of the Restoration was Joseph Smith. He set up communities in different parts of the country, uh, that elicited some fear and worries as these communities started to grow, and people think, oh, they're going to have political power. It really created a lot of fear. In Missouri, that was a slave state, uh, he was anti-slavery, but was willing to function in a pluralistic society. But he had these principles, and he essentially told people who were looking at, how do you get people to behave like this, or how do you get people? And he says, well, I teach them true principles, and they govern themselves. And so if you're more about principles than you are about a person telling you what to do, we're one thing that might be unique about our faith is we don't have a doctrine of prophetic infallibility. Yes, we believe in prophets. The person that gave the speech that moved Jonathan, we believe is a prophet, seer, and a rebel. And he declared himself as such when he actually gave the speech. And he's a brilliant individual, as is the current president of the church today. He's a brilliant heart surgeon. But the functioning on principles is really what matters. And so we got to the end of that discussion with Jonathan, I asked him about a constitution of faith. When I was, going through the Constitution of Knowledge, his prior book, what was coming through my mind is, well, wouldn't it be interesting to author a book on the Constitution of faith? And then as I thought about it, I thought, well, my own faith has a constitution. And it's not about a particular person, but it is about a divine being. And the first principle is we believe in God, the eternal Father, and his Son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost. And so you have a starting point. We also believe in fairness, that man will be punished for their own sins and not for Adam's transgression. So we're not accountable for somebody else's. We don't inherit yes, we're fallen and we're imperfect, but we don't inherit somebody else's sins or somebody else's problems. We are responsible for ourselves. We have a stewardship for ourselves. And even though we make mistakes and we mess up, we also believe that through the atonement of Jesus Christ, all mankind will be saved by obedience to the laws and ordinances of the gospel. And so, I'm just quoting these things to you. But those are the first three things. And then the next, part of those articles of faith, there are 13 of them. And, they go through, what it looks like to live that. What's the order, the structure of that? How does that work? And then it goes into another, section that talks a little bit about the limits of Scripture, that we believe in, the Bible to be the Word of God as far as it is translated correctly. So if you're not interpreting it correctly, you're going to get off base. So you got to make sure that your interpretation of what you're experiencing is accurate and true to what God truly is like. Not what you think he is like, not what your projections are, but you have to come to accept that there's justice and mercy in God and in his plan and so forth. If I'm,
So that's kind of okay. So no, this helps me because this makes more sense to me than when you're saying, oh, like, that you believe I have basically a constitution of faith, right?
Yeah.
It's not the same as yours.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if I believed that I had a constitution of faith, then I would be more comfortable in my own space, in this space that's often feels dangerous, that feels, from, all different, in the moment, or maybe even a larger sense,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I could feel more comfortable. Maybe I'm not as aware as I could be that I'm acting, reacting, coming from that space, that
Mm-hmm.
constitution of my own faith. And if I became more aware of it, or maybe made it more, I don't know, just more obvious to myself,
Mm-hmm.
that I would, feel safer, more comfortable, whatever.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is that
Yeah.
a good
Yeah.
description of?
I think it
Okay.
really is. But then you get into, Elizabeth, what I'm seeing has happened to you is you went through this experience where you were living true to your values, your principles, going along, living your life, doing what you thought was the right thing, and then you got slammed, and what you thought was accepting you, what you thought was your community
Right.
has
I thought
betrayed
we shared a
you.
constitution of
Mm-hmm.
faith.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so then you're feeling like you don't belong. You're feeling like, it's really, and I'm sitting here saying, well, Elizabeth, if you wouldn't have had that experience, you and I probably wouldn't be having this conversation today. And I feel a connection to you. I feel like, well, you've found a different community within the Institute for Liberal Values where there are a lot of different people there. A lot of, and,
Some real characters.
well, you're looking at him. Yeah, that's exactly it. But when it comes down to it, we all are concerned about what we see in the world and in the United States of America and in academia and in the media and in politics and in anywhere where there's concentrated coercive power. We are concerned about
Um, so I sort of circle back around to something that I'd shared with you about Arthur Frank, who's in psychology, who writes about illness and stuff. And so I'm sort of coming to this idea, which I think is related to what we're talking about here, that before I was living in this sort of idea of what he calls deep health.
that.
My
Hmm.
assumption is that, I'm not going to get sick. And if I do get sick, it's going to be curable. So in terms of being, canceled by the progressive left, it's like, oh, well, even if I do get a little bit sideways of these people, I'm going to, once I make it clear to them, or fire makes it clear to them or whatever, that they're, acting in a hypocritical way against what they say they value, that it will be realigned. That will be that'll be the little injection, the B12 injection, and it'll all be fine. And most of us live in this idea of deep health most of our lives. And then I, sort of got social, sort of got a social illness, if you will.
Yeah.
And and I was in this sort of chaotic, and that's sort of how I feel about my sort of like political situation right now, this sort of chaos where I can't figure out, um, like, is there a cure for me out there? Are there friends? Who can I trust? Where when you're actually sick with a chronic illness, it's more like you go to different doctors and everybody's doing a different test, and we do it, all these different things, and you just keep getting unsatisfactory answers. It's
Hmm.
like something helps for 15, helps for 2 weeks, and then that medicine quits helping. And it's the same kind of idea when you're canceled, and you just sort of like, you're just wandering.
Hmm.
And now I feel like what you just described, I'm sort of coming over to this other place where, um i'm I have to figure out how to live with this, um and make new friends. Old friends want me to be who I was, and I'm not
Hmm.
who I was, right?
Right.
I don't want to be in the chaos anymore,
Hmm.
and I'm trying to exit that. And maybe that's part of my anxiety now, because I feel like the new administration and stuff is sort of like trying to push me back into a chaos that, it may not be exactly the same, but it's the same feeling. And I'm resisting because I feel like I'm getting myself out of that chaotic place where I'm just grasping at anything that will make me feel like I'm not on quicksand. So I'm getting there and making new friends, making other friends who recognize that deep health is a myth, right?
Hmm.
But that's not the same thing as focusing on the chronic illness all the time.
Yeah.
So I have to be able to navigate my world with this chronic illness, and not, so I have to make adjustments but not allow it to consume me, right? I don't want
Hmm.
to become a hermit or whatever.
Hmm.
um and so maybe that's this sort of chaos with the political stuff is making me feel extra anxious because it's pulling me back into that anxiety. And so
Hmm.
this conversation has been helpful to, I mean, I don't know if anybody, hopefully somebody who listens will all, but you've been very helpful to me
Hey,
in
all
this
right,
little
I'll send
counseling
you a
session
bill.
to think about this idea of, like this new sort of constitution of my own constitution
Right.
of faith, and what that means in this new place where I've had to make new friends. It's not that I don't like those people or whatever, I just can't interact with them.
Hmm.
I'm a constant disappointment to them, and they are a constant disappointment to me. I can't be who I was,
Right.
and they can't be what I need. And
Right.
so I brought a few people along on the new journey, and those are the only people. I can't get a lot of other people there with me,
Mm.
Um, so I'm going to work on my
Yeah.
own personal constitution of faith.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
gonna,
you're having to
you know,
accept a price to pay for your belief in truth and viewpoint diversity, and accepting that there is a price that you will pay for that. That there will
mm,
be people who don't agree with you. There will be mistakes that you make yourself where you're not living true from time to time, and so you have to experience change and allow for redemption of somebody who's imperfect. And you know that has to happen as well. Being kind to yourself and giving yourself grace of being able to mess up and say, okay, I made a mistake, but also surrounding yourself with people who are willing to have frank conversations with you and say, hey, well, this is where I disagree with you, or this
mhm,
is where I think you cross the line with me. And not seeing that as something that's a trait that's irredeemable in a relationship, but it's a state through which we can find our way together. We can figure some stuff out. That you know those kinds of principles, I think, are what will ultimately help our country, but also help ourselves if we all have a constitution by which we live.
yeah. And one that's not sort of steeped in that naive kind of like,
Hmm.
the deep health or the naivete that, like, oh well,
Yeah.
everything's going to continue on like it was, and we're fine. It doesn't,
Right.
no, we have to, like you said, there are challenging states ahead of us,
Right.
and and we need to be ready, to and open to at least discussing
Right.
how to move through those.
Hmm.
So
And so one of the things that I think is helpful is to recognize that we're all a work in progress. That your journal of your life is your history, but it's not set in stone. It's not written. That there's an open canon in the Book of Elizabeth. And, as you learn new things, new principles, new practices, then you live true to those things, consistent with your values. Then there's some peace to be found in that internally, but also as you're clear with as you as we each gain greater clarity, we're more likely to dialogue and talk about it. We're more secure with ourselves. We're more likely to talk with people who are different than us, and that's okay. And that's what I think this Boston Globe article helped us see, is that, hey, you got to be careful about whatever side of the political spectrum you're on. You got to be careful about your insecurities and demonizing and polarizing. The polarization of our country is a very significant problem. And being true to our constitution, our political constitution, but also our personal constitutions, I think is extremely important.
yeah, I mean, he does say, and these next few years, as Trump opponents push back on all the cruelty, they do well to dial back the righteous indignation. It didn't win the last election, and it won't win the next one. What's needed is vision. One might even call it a prophecy.
Hey, a little bit of faith for you right there.
Yeah. So that's probably a good place for us to end. Thank you
That's
so
great.
much.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth.